Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Voxology podcast. I am joined by Tim and Suzie, or as they're known, Suzie and Tim. And Suzie, Tim, and I, first of all, we need to respond to some criticism.
Yep.
And maybe not criticism, but helpfulness. There have been comments that I'm coughing too much on the podcast. First of all, we do not have a cough button, so you just have to deal with it. Secondly, I just had pneumonia. And thirdly, I've just picked up vaping. And so the combo of those things, I'm willing to live with a cough just for the sake of nicotine. I am, and you can't tell me otherwise.
That's right.
And Suzie, I mean, of the three of us, Tim, who do you think smokes the most cigars of the three of us? Who would you guess, Stafford? Who would you guess?
Well, this feels like a very leading question, so
wow.
Throw my. I mean, I haven't had a cigar.
I thought you were going to bring up my past of smoking cigarettes, because I did actually smoke a lot of cigarettes at one point in time.
You both did. Well, I've never.
I mean, we're Gen
had
Xers that grew up in the grunge era, so
right.
it was kind of part of the deal. The flannels, the
Oh,
docs,
I love it.
the music, and the cigarettes. They all kind of went together. It was part of the brand. Yeah.
So you started really early, right?
Yes, I might have had my first cigarette when I was in the 4th grade.
Whoa, that is very early.
I know.
Whoa.
Isn't that awful? But I didn't actively start smoking till probably high school and definitely college.
Yeah.
But I tried a cigarette at Amy Barcelo's house when I was in the 4th grade.
Ooh, name drop.
Oh, Amy.
She's driving in her car right now going oh.
I knew she was trouble when she first walked in.
Trouble.
Tim, how old were you when you tried your first cigarette?
I don't know, somewhere in mid high school. And then I was like, oh,
all right.
I like this. Let's do this.
Wow. What does nicotine do exactly? I mean, does it amp you up, or is it like caffeine? Like, what's it do? Suzie was preparing to answer authoritatively.
Well, I was gonna say I didn't hear before I heard the second part of your question. I was gonna say, because my dad's visiting right now, and my dad is 78 years old, and he started smoking at the age of 11.
Wow.
11.
Whoa.
Which I guess is me too, 4th grade. But I mean, he was legit smoking at 11 and has never quit. And here we are at 3 heart attacks later, and he's still going. So
Dang.
Yeah.
It does that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that your question?
But
fair. I was
in the 90s. In the 90s, it was just super chill.
That's right.
You're listening to little Alice in Chains, and you've got cigarette.
So
it's
good.
A vibe.
So
it's a
good.
Vibe.
Oh yeah.
But what does nicotine do? What makes it so? What does it do to your body? Is it a stimulant?
It gives you a little buzz. At least at first it does, and then it's just then it's just kind of cruising after that. You lose the buzz.
But is it like a buzz? How? Like a beer, like alcohol buzz, or
Well,
I'm trying to get at the appeal here.
I mean, okay, so I actually did use it for a stimulant when I was one of my first jobs out of college. I was a production assistant on a TV show, so I had to drive around really late at night into the wee hours of the morning delivering scripts all over LA. So I would smoke.
Wow.
So I would smoke in the car so I could stay awake while I was driving.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like caffeine in that way.
Yeah, but then there's also the relaxing aspect of it. It just helps you kind of relax. But somebody told me recently that it's more of the oral fixation and the inhaling, the deep breath thing. If you do deep breath work, it actually does the same type of thing to your ability to relax. So
nice.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't smoke anymore.
Hey,
to be clear, I don't smoke cigarettes anymore, but I do enjoy a cigar once in a while.
Yeah, there is something. We've often joked about how
Are we recording this?
Yes, how bad it is.
Oh my gosh.
The things that bring you the most joy, not the most joy, not everything, but a lot of things that bring you a lot of joy are bad for you. Because there's nothing like sitting with people, having a drink, smoking a cigarette, and having a 2 or 3 hour conversation. Like that's where most of that happened for me. A lot of it was driving. Driving was always a thing, but being able to just sit and smoke. Yeah, road sodas is what we call them. JK, I don't drink and drive. Just to put some disclaimers out there. We're off to a weird start.
I tell you,
it's like
I
confession time.
I feel like I've missed out of, well, I don't know. I had one run-in with tobacco, and it was when I was like a junior in college, and somebody gave me one of those packets that you like that's full of dip or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I put it in between my cheek and gum because that's what the advertisement said. But they didn't say don't swallow the spit.
So you learned the hard way.
I don't know that I've ever been so sick in my life.
Did you throw up?
I was. Repeatedly. I mean, it was. So and not that I was like even tempted to do it beforehand, but boy, that certainly guaranteed tobacco never to be a temptation. Now, if you sit me with a steak and some potatoes and some, ice cream, I could have a conversation for 3 hours.
Well,
that's no
we're
problem
all
right
like
there.
I'm doing a little diet right now. One of my best friends is doing like a really intense 90 days, and it's a very specific diet workout program. And part of it is trying not to eat sugar. But when you go and you read everything in American food, like it's all just packed with sugar. Even the stuff you think is the healthiest, you'll look at the ingredients and so much sugar. So we're having a conversation about just how much, like you go to the store and there is a brand, like someone bought the brand name organic early on. And it doesn't mean any of the food is actually organic. It's just the name of their...
Totally.
And so it's just like they used to hand cigarettes to people off the boat and just be like, hey, this is healthy for you. This is great. Have fun. Yeah. And so it's just we just live in a weird, the discernment that it takes to be healthy in America is very difficult.
It is. Unless you're a friend of Suzie. And then, and I kid you not, Suzie is one of the greatest cooks and expressors of hospitality in the history of the planet.
Aww.
So that's all I'm saying. Susie's able to do things with salad that I've not yet tried, but heard things about that are great. So I love it. Anyway, we are joined today by Suzie Lind, pastor, elder, podcaster extraordinaire, fellow at the Center for what?
Formation, Justice, and Peace.
Yes. I get the order wrong in my brain all the time. Tim Stafford is, where are you a fellow at? You're a fellow at like bestfriends.com and guys that we want to have a beer with.
That's right.
And all of that. But I have to say, okay, I can't believe we spent 10 minutes on smoking. I was just trying to make a cough joke, but I have to report in. So many of you who've been regular listeners, that we tried something here a couple of weeks ago that we have been super excited for, and we had 19. Somebody brought his spouse. We had 19 of the greatest humans in the history of the world to Nashville, Tennessee, where we hosted a kind of a 2-day. We don't want to call it a retreat because it's not that. We don't want to call it a conference because it certainly isn't that. But Joanna, our friend, calls it a nonference, which I thought was funny. Yeah, or an inference. But it was incredible. We had 2 days with people who are either in vocational ministry in a church or working for some parachurch organization. And we spent some time with a spiritual director and a therapist going over our stories and bearing witness to each other's stories and the pain. And we spent time talking about where that pain gets stored and how hard it is to access and how easy it is to be dehumanized in American Christianity. and then be even more dehumanized as a colluder with the church sort of vocational ministry style we've adopted in American Christianity. That's it, man. And so it was unbelievable. I want you to know Tim Stafford did prayers of the people, and it was phenomenal,
amazing.
And served as communion. And Suzie Lind, good Lord, if there is a person better designed for spiritual directorship and fellowship at some institute, I have not met this person. She was just on fire. So it was amazing. I'd love to hear what you guys kind of took away from it. And the reason we want to bring it back up is just, first of all, to say thank you for all of those who support the podcast. We had a generous giver who kind of donated towards this, but the fact that we could even like put something like this on is just a testament to how generous our whole community is. I want to say thank you to our church, Journey Church, which was an amazing host and gracious and all of those sorts of things. But it was such a profound couple of days. And we're hoping perhaps to explore other sorts of topics and avenues in the future. But before we move away from that, I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts or reflections about what that was like.
Go for it, Suzie.
Well, I guess I can share one of my bigger takeaways from the whole 3 days was when we started on the first day, the first conversation that we had, Mike, you had some really strong words of affirmation, but also like, hey, you're here for you and not for anyone else. And so don't show up here as a pastor. Don't try to pastor people, and don't come here in your work self. Come here as your human self and receive all that God has for you, right? It was something like that, but it felt a little stronger coming from you.
Telling pastors to not pastor each other is a hard,
like we're not fixing
difficult.
People, like all that stuff, right? And so then when we talked about the dehumanization that sometimes happens to people in ministry, and then, towards the end of it, we kind of started to notice what our part in, as you said, colluding with the current system might be. But the thing that I noticed on the third day was how, as we were leaving and we were debriefing with the group, that there were several people who said that they wish that this is what church would be like. And it occurred to me that maybe, perhaps, one of the reasons why church is not experienced in that way is that we show up as pastors and not as our human selves, with the vulnerability that is, because if you show up as a human when you're a pastor, that could cost you something.
Well, you get crushed if you're not.
Yeah. So, I don't know. It just made me wonder, like, how, and I don't think that applies just to pastors. I think it applies to everybody who shows up with a certain, that when they feel like they have to show up a certain way to church,
right?
You don't really get to experience it as a human.
Yeah. No, that's so good. And there's this dynamic that we were trying to explore where we're naming, pain and trauma and disappointment and hurt and anger. I mean, it's just, and the threads in these stories are, there's so much sexual sin being done in churches where, some of our folks had to like step into leadership positions because of it. There's so much control in church leadership. There's so much legalism. I mean, it was just dripping. And there were, commonalities, which was part of the great gift, was knowing we're not alone in feeling betrayed, abandoned, whatever. But you're right, Suze, that turn then to realize, I've contributed to the fact that we live in a place where I can't be human. And I've benefited, not everybody, but I've benefited from that. And the number of people that were there who were wrestling with, I don't know that I can stay here anymore, was fairly, significant.
Well, that road has.
And I know, Tim, you had some.
That road has you can only walk a road so long in a performance mode of stripping humanity from yourself. Like there's a deadline to it. There's a roadblock to it. So you watch, like whether it's someone that was there with us or talking about people that they've worked with, that it's impossible. It does not end well. And so, like dehumanization was a word that got tossed around so much. And, Mike, you've talked a lot about the public and private selves and how it's hard to reconcile those things and how we've built a model that forces pastors into having a public persona and hiding their private persona. And it's just like, if anything from the week, it's just to echo what Suzie said, is like we need to reinvent the system. Like it is not built for human flourishing, and which is wild because it's the church. Like we're supposed to be manifesting human flourishing and manifesting an environment for that and safety, and instead we have built the opposite, where people feel like they have to put on a facade to show up as a congregant, but even more so, the person in the front has to fulfill a very specific role in identity, and it's just like, it is toxic. And so there's so many stories of catharsis, not just from the folks that were there, but there's catharsis to leaving ministry. And it's like, man, that sucks. They're like, they're like, when they have that realization, it's just tough.
Yeah. But I think Tim, you and I both said a couple of times when we heard people's stories and them saying that they were struggling with whether they wanted to stay or not, you and I both said, like, but we need people like you in those roles. So.
Well, I mean, I wish that what I wish we could do if we had all the money and time and space and influence would be to like restructure seminaries. Because it's one thing to be able to hold these little meetings for people that have gone through a bunch of trauma, but seminaries are not, I don't know, I haven't been to a seminary, but what I've gathered from hearing from other people is that they're not necessarily equipping people for really what this job entails. Like they almost are equipping you to hide or to build a false persona
Yeah, but I also think like there's so much that you just can't learn until you're in it, Right. I mean, I think seminaries can do, I'm in seminary right now, and I feel like they're doing a really good job of giving me knowledge and information that I never had before, and that I wasn't ever able to interact with before. And so that part is super helpful. But as far as like, dealing with some of the stuff that you deal with in ministry, like, it's the school of hard knocks that I think teaches you the real lessons. But if you don't feel like you can come and show up as yourself, and I'm guilty of this totally, that I'm complicit with the system when I show up and comply. If I comply with who you want me to be as a pastor, especially if, I don't want to say especially a female pastor, because I don't think it's just specific to women or men. Maybe in some circumstances it is, but if I show up in the way that you think I'm supposed to show up, then I'm complying with the system. But if I resist that and I show up as myself and I'm willing to take the risk and the hits that come with that, then it could be forged into something beautiful, or it could die, and maybe it needs to.
Yeah, well, it's such a weird, like the not a meme, but like the idea that people share as a joke that you show up to church on Sunday morning and then you go and you're the worst tipper and you're rude to your waiters and whatever on Sunday afternoon, which if anybody, I did service jobs for a while. If anyone's been there, Sundays are not a great day to, and I'm not saying that's completely, maybe there's other factors at play, but it did tend to be Sunday afternoons were always pretty rough. And so the joke there is that, you're one thing in the church hall and then you're something else when you walk out. And that's just I do think that we have a system that does, I don't want to say encourage that, but it does encourage that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When we say like dehumanize, it's what we mean is that we're not allowed to show up with all of our doubts, questions, quirks, weaknesses, even in churches that are super gracious with those. And particularly as people who put themselves forward as religious leaders, right? We have a financial stake in appearing more righteous than we are, which is death. And so when we say dehumanize, what we mean is we can't show up fully us. And I understand there's a part of that that's good and true, right? I mean, if we were just always, airing our dirty laundry with each other, that's a problem. Our job as ministers isn't to like work out our issues publicly.
From the pulpit.
From the pulpit, right? There's a problematic word. But how it is, and one of the greatest things that somebody said, is they just said, I feel rehumanized, that I'm learning how to listen to my body. Like Vanessa, our spiritual director, had this great line. She said, our job is not to tell you what you should do. Our job is to help you listen to what your body and soul are screaming at you.
So wise.
Because they'll know first what you should do.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. So just a massive thank you for the folks that took the time and effort to come. And we, from Canada all the way down to Texas, from New Jersey all the way to California, we covered the country, baby. And many thanks to Tim and Suzie. One of the things that we did is we offered free spiritual direction during lunch times, and Vanessa and Suzie and Tim were booked solid. Notice there's one individual here who has never smoked, nor does he offer spiritual direction. Maybe there's a correlation. I'm not entirely sure.
That's what nicotine really does.
Yeah.
What it felt like. Yes. Yeah.
I might start smoking again.
Okay. That's fine. Just we need a cough button as long as we need one, or as long as we are doing this. Now, one of the things that was great is about how in the space of like 3 days, 2.5 days, a group of total strangers becomes family.
Yeah.
And it's in their oddballness that their family grows and flourishes.
Well, there's power in weakness, Mike. I don't know if you've heard that, but
I don't know. But the three of us just saw, Tim, a movie.
Yes.
That reflects on how families become put together, not just biologically, but out of shared weakness and weirdness.
Yeah, it was called the Jesus Revolution. JK.
Yeah. No, what you wanted to talk a little bit about Guardians.
Yeah, so spoilers, if you haven't seen it yet, press the forward button, 5 minutes. But I thought, we only have a couple minutes, but there's a lot of fun themes with family, obviously. We were all sharing different parts that made us choke up and cry, which were surprising, because you went in as Guardians of the Galaxy, you kind of expected a...
Yeah, it's a raccoon in a tree.
Yeah, it's Chris Pratt.
Well,
but I thought one of the things that really struck me, there's a lot of things. One of them, about when Drax gets told, I see you're not a destroyer, you're a dad. That one kind of knocked me down for a second. But the villain, the high evolutionary, he had this line when things were falling apart, and they were questioning they kind of show how he built Rocket. He's trying to build this perfect race of people, and he talks about how I can't remember if he said exactly that God doesn't exist, so I had to step in, or God wasn't doing something, so I had to step in.
Yeah.
God doesn't exist.
Yeah, so I was playing around with that in my head for a while afterwards, and I think that we are just as guilty, if not more guilty, than just the non-believing people or whatever, at stepping in and playing God. When we don't see God, or we don't know, or if God's not working the way that we expect or think he should be working, we step in and we play God. And I just thought it would open up a really interesting conversation about how we've seen in ourselves, in our churches, or around us in the country, just Christians playing God. Like whether it's mandating morality, however. But it opened up a really, I don't know, that was one of the things I was playing around with in my head for a while afterwards, is just Where do I see that? How do I see that? How do we see it? That's
Well,
all.
the other thing that was really interesting is there was another line that someone said about him, about the villain guy, that
High evolutionary.
the high evolutionary, because they were saying, someone was saying, he's trying to make a perfect society, and the other I don't remember what character it was, but they said it's not that he's trying to make it perfect, he just doesn't like the way things are.
Yeah.
So that was his motivation for everything, because he would create all these planets and then scrap them when they inevitably went bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it reminded me a little of the Noah and the Ark story at the beginning, where he just sort of starts over and cleanses, and it's like, ooh, that feels weird to do that. Not sure about that. Absolutely, but to me, the family vibe of, you've got a contrast between two societies, one that's, striving to be perfect, and one that is just so horribly not. No matter how they try to hide from each other, their quirks and weaknesses just keep coming up and driving each other crazy.
Well, sometimes I'll challenge my students to write an essay like, define family, and what does that look like to you? And so, I don't know, coming from the party of family values, a lot of these Christian kids they have their ways that they've been handed at how to define family. But after working in the prison, which, Mike, I know you've been in there, Suze, I don't know if you've had experience with that, but when you work with people who found family in gangs or other places, people who would literally lay down on the tracks for you, but you have no blood relation to them. Like, family is a really interesting theme to play around with, especially coming off things like Mother's Day and Father's Day coming up, and those kind of things. Like, what defines a mother? What defines a father? What defines family? Is it only DNA and genetics, or is it something so much more than that?
Yeah. Come on. Hi, I'm Toofs. I'm Floor. What was the other guy's name?
I think it's the place where you find belonging.
Teef.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Is the place where you find a sense of belonging, like whether you belong because you're just as weird as the next person, or because you believe the same way, because you've been through the same trauma, because the different things that bond us together are usually from a sense of belonging and identifying with each other.
Yeah.
Yes. I love that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have an interview today that is going to be pretty salvific. We're talking to Sheila, and I don't know if Rebecca's going to join us or not, but Sheila is from baremarriage.com, B-A-R-E, and she wrote a book called The Great Sex Rescue.
That's good that you spelled that out, just in case people were like B-E-A-R.
Yeah. Don't type that in. Type that in carefully. And the Great Sex Rescue is what I called Tim for a while. But
wow,
you're the only one.
Wow.
And then they just wrote a book called She Deserves Better, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So we are stoked to talk about some really important stuff, and hope you enjoyed the interview. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, do we have a doozy for you today? Oh, it's big. It's dynamic. And big in all the best ways. Like large physically, me, but big personality-wise, Suzie and the ladies. We got Sheila and Rebecca with us from Bare Marriage, and let me spell that out very clearly. Don't type in Bare in any other way. B-A-R-E, marriage. And these ladies with a third, Joanna, is that her name?
Yes,
the third?
Joanna.
So you've written The Great Sex Rescue, which was, and I'd love for you to recap that here in a moment. Yes, so good. And you just came out with a book that sort of flowed from that one called She Deserves Better, and raising girls to resist toxic teachings on sex, self, and speaking up. And so anyway, we're delighted to have you. If you would, just for a moment, could you guys, Sheila, I'd love to start with you. Could you tell us, like, what was your background? Were you raised in a church context? What were if so, what was that? And what were some of the messages that either explicitly or implicitly you were receiving early on about what it is to be a girl/woman?
I was raised in an evangelical church. So we're Canadian. So we don't like, how's it going, eh? So we don't have evangelicalism in exactly the same way as the US. So when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, very egalitarian family, even though we were going to more complementarian churches, my family has always been very female affirming. I raised my kids, though, in evangelical churches that were getting more and more and more conservative as the years went on, and more of the American influence came north. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
We'll put it this way. I read Brio magazine from Focus on the Family religiously for like 5 years there in my junior high and high school. So
Did you listen to Adventures in Odyssey? I mean, that's what separates the real faithful from the mediocre.
We didn't, but I asked you guys, I remember asking you guys if I could, but it was the same time as our youth group. Our local Christian radio station put it on at the same time as our youth group, so I didn't actually get to. So we'd listen to 5 minutes on the way to youth group. Yep.
So Sheila,
okay, well,
did
that
you
explains
know
a
that
lot.
she was reading Brio at the time?
She bought it for
I
me.
bought it for her.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
This is the thing. Like, I always thought, they love Jesus. I love Jesus. We're all saying the same thing. Right? This was this was my overarching belief for years. And everything changed for me in 2019 when I had a migraine one day and I was on Twitter trying to procrastinate. And these people were having a fight over whether they needed love or respect. And they were referring to Emerson Eggerich's book, Love and Respect. And I thought, I have that book. This is a great way to procrastinate. So I went and got it. And I read the sex chapter because I'm a sex blogger. Like, I spend my life looking at research about sex and writing about sex and writing books about sex. So I turned to the sex chapter and it was like a nuclear bomb went off in my living room. I couldn't believe it. Because I read, if your husband's typical, he has a need that you don't have. The need is for physical release. If he doesn't get it, he'll come under satanic attack.
Oh.
And all affairs are caused by women not having sex. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there wasn't a single word about women's pleasure. And so that totally changed everything that we do, and put us on a new trajectory where we just decided we need to figure out what's going on. So that started Great Sex Rescue. We surveyed 20,000 evangelical women to figure out if messages in the evangelical church actually hurt women's marital and sexual satisfaction.
I was always told, I mean, and there were studies, in quotes, to back this up, that evangelical women had the best sex out there. I mean, I remember there was a study in 2001, I think, that even Time magazine picked up and said, yeah, if you want to have the best sex ever, be conservative and be religious.
Can I do this one?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've actually we've run some numbers on this one. This actually isn't in the book, so you guys are getting exclusive content.
Oh!
Are you excited?
Wow.
Oh yeah, just for you guys. Okay, so women are more likely to rate their sex life as great, even if they don't reach orgasm, if they believe in hierarchy in marriage.
So that's a typically very strong. That's a really a big measure for religious conservative religiosity.
Yeah.
Right, is
So-
whether you believe in a male-female hierarchy.
So does that
So in
mean then that
essence-
they're just saying that I'm doing my job, so it's good?
Yeah, because they're judging whether
Wow.
their sex life is good on how much their husband likes it, not how much they like it. So the subjective
snap.
the subjective measures of your sex life don't match the objective measures
Oh, man.
when there's a lot of hierarchy, conservatism in marriage. When you don't have that, then women's subjective and objective tend to match more. Now, that being said, religious women do tend to have better sex. So we're not saying that religious women have bad sex. What we are saying is that there are some teachings in the evangelical world that make it worse. And if we believe in Christ, we should have great sex. We should have great marriages. So I don't think the answer is to say, well, at least we're better than the world. The answer should be, let's do this well.
Yeah.
Period.
That'll
That's really
preach.
good.
Yeah, I just remember that was I was single until I was 29, which I know is shocking, and one of the purity culture And I love how you guys describe purity culture through threatening and bribing. So the threat was, here are all the things. You're going to rip your soul up. You're not going to be able to enjoy a covenant partner. You're going to engage in cheating behavior after. I mean, so on, so on, so on. But the bribe was, the sex is going to be amazing. Mm-hmm. And people would point to that study to see. And so I can hear as a guy that I could interpret that through a guy's perspective and go, oh yeah, see, there you go. And what's so interesting is you're saying from a woman's perspective, it's only great in relationship to the guy. It's not great for her as a kind of a image-bearing female on her own, which was never something we were ever introduced to. The idea, I mean, we were taught, of course, it's reciprocal. But you have this word or this phrase that I've come to, I think it has a lot of explanatory power, the internalized misogyny, that even if you're not receiving explicitly hierarchical messages, you're still receiving them. And I'd love it if you'd spend a little time kind of talking about how that plays out in evangelical conversations about sex, because I think for some of us of a certain generation, purity culture was very explicit. The goal of purity culture is to get you as a virgin to your wedding night. But that doesn't seem as emphasized, but purity culture has sort of morphed into new sort of avenues of teaching. And so I was just curious, what does internalized misogyny look like for young women when, even if they're being raised in, religious environments that aren't as purity minded as some of the ones we were raised in?
Mm-hmm. What we've found, because our research has taken we've done a couple different branches of research, and one of them that we've done is, of course, really thorough reviews of like best-selling books and best-selling resources for both grown, women in marriages and also for teenagers. And something that we've noticed again and again and again in these resources is that girls are told from as young as 8 years old, we are told that our job as Christians is to make sure we don't inconvenience the men around us. That's our job. So, for example, there's in the Secret Keeper Girl curriculum that was really popular, now branded as 8 Great Dates for Moms and Daughters. There's all these examples of how girls need to make sure that they cover up their 8-year-old bodies so that the grown men don't get intoxicated by them. Or there's a submission quiz that tells girls that you need to make sure you stay quiet if you see someone making a mistake and let someone else deal with it because you are not the one who's supposed to speak up. And there's all these different messages that girls are given.
I want to take
that
the
tells
submission
us,
quiz.
Yeah,
we did.
We did not do well. We did not score well. We are not submissive servants.
Can we talk about that?
I think we were boisterous bosses. Yeah, I think that we scored as boisterous bosses. Yeah. But apparently God's not able to use us.
A word to our audience. Bosses? If you're able to watch this on YouTube, you need to watch Susie's face.
Yes.
As some of these things are being said, not only nodding in agreement, because I never heard this. I mean, I got the male side of purity culture, but I never heard anything like this. Oh, well,
and I think
Lord.
This is what we see in that more tricky stuff, because you're exactly right. A lot of people know now. We're like, okay, purity culture bad. So we don't say purity culture. So we don't say if you have sex, you're a chewed up piece of bubble gum. We can't say that anymore. We can't say that you're a dirty piece of dirt in a glass of water that no one wants to drink anymore. We can't say that. So what we say instead are things like, make sure that you are not being so prideful that you are going to disrespect people. And they make these huge Christianese long paragraphs that they're giving these girls that what it really boils down to is you're being too loud. Sit down. We read books for teenagers where girls are told, that boys don't like to be disrespected. And so if you get a boy angry, that means that you've likely disrespected him. So it's your fault if a boy gets angry at you. And any of us who have daughters, that is not what we want our daughters to grow up thinking, is that if a boy's angry at you, then it's your fault. It's like we're already just darvoing the girls for their abusive boyfriends, right? Like we're doing half the work for the abuser right now. And these are the kinds of messages that we hear even when this whole purity culture stuff is not being taught as explicitly. It's all still implicitly there because the underlying foundation has not been addressed. The underlying foundation is that women exist to make men's life easier rather than women exist simply because they are created in the image of God. Yeah. They exist as equal image bearers. Yeah. They exist to serve God, not to just enable a little bit of the harmful behaviors that we see in a lot of men who are used to being catered to. And that's what we're trying to work about is giving people a better way forward so that we can get back to what it actually means to be a Christian. It's not about just falling in line. It's about falling after Christ. That's the difference. And that shouldn't be so separated between girls and boys, because it makes a whole mess when we make it that girls being Christian looks different than boys being Christians. We've gone wrong.
You know, one of the places where I see the dynamic you're talking about play out publicly is the great yoga pants debate that surfaces every year on Twitter.
The one from last week.
Yep. Here's Eric.
It's the Twitter liturgical calendar.
Yeah, someone was saying it was
that's
Twitter
funny.
Liturgical calendar.
Yeah,
it shows up.
So we have David and Bathsheba every January.
Yes.
Whether or not that was consensual. Then we have yoga pants around Valentine's Day. So here's our friend Eric. It's not just that we should rethink public nakedness, skin-tight yoga pants, or bikinis at the beach. We definitely should. But we should also rethink co-ed public swim beaches and pools altogether.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah. So, great. We're all for hot takes on the tweets. What does a message like that communicate to women young and old?
Well, let me give you some numbers to it, because that's what we like to do.
Here we go with your research. Sheila, always about your research.
That's right. Okay. So after we did the Great Sex Rescue, we surveyed another 7,000 women for our new book, She Deserves Better, to find out how the messages they received as teens and the experiences they had affect them long term. And when you tell girls, teenage girls, we measured 4 different modesty messages, okay? Boys are visual in a way that girls can never understand. A boy can't help but lust if a girl is dressed like she's trying to incite it.
Yep.
Girls have a responsibility not to be a stumbling block to the boys around them with what they wear. Girls who dress immodestly are worse than girls who don't. So when girls believe that, they are 68% more likely to marry an abuser.
68?
68% more likely to marry an abuser. They are 52% more likely to experience sexual pain. And I don't think people know this. Okay, so I'm going to teach you all a word. Everybody, I want you to know this word, okay? Vaginismus.
Yes, I thought that was a Harry Potter spell, but I've since realized because of you guys, you too, I've learned this word that I did not realize.
But so erectile dysfunction, y'all know what erectile dysfunction is, right? The little blue pill, we all know that. Like, yes.
Can you imagine if there were commercials for vaginismus like there are for erectile dysfunction?
Well, you know why there's not? Because there isn't a drug, because they don't do research on it, because there's no money in it. Anyway, okay, so
there's no money in it.
affects way more people under the age of 40 than erectile dysfunction does. And it's largely an evangelical problem. So we have about 2.5.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Before I made the joke, what is it?
Okay.
If it's not a Harry Potter thing.
It is the muscles of the vaginal wall contract and become really tight, which makes penetration really painful, if not impossible. Okay. Some women can't even use tampons. You know, medical exams are really difficult. It's terrible. And evangelical women suffer at 22.7% of evangelical women have had this. Okay. That is about 2.5 times the rate of the general population. This is largely our issue. And it's because of stuff like the modesty message. There's other things too. We found in our Great Sex Rescue survey that the obligation sex message is highly correlated with it. So believing that you're obligated to have sex when he wants it. Anything that takes away your agency or that makes you feel like sex is threatening. Yeah. And when you tell girls, he can't help but lust, you need to not be a stumbling block. You're telling them, no matter how much you may want real love, he's only ever going to see you as a sexual being. Yeah. He's really only going to see you like that. And your body's dangerous because it can get him out of control. And so you're never going to be really safe.
So the body, the female body holds those messages internally,
It does.
and oh wow, so that's like the body keeps the score kind of thing.
It is, yeah.
But it does
Our bodies
around that.
interpret. Yeah, our bodies
Yeah.
interpret all these things as trauma because they're telling our bodies, this isn't safe. You don't want to do this. You need to protect yourself because the world's not safe.
Oh.
And that's what the modesty message does to women. And whenever guys preach, okay, well, obviously lust is a guy's responsibility because Jesus said, pluck out your eye, but women still need to not be stumbling blocks and women need to have mercy. I feel like saying to them, so you're okay with a 52% higher rate of vaginismus. You're okay with a 68% higher chance of marrying an abuser. You would rather girls have long-term harm than that boys or men have to be temporarily uncomfortable.
Yeah.
or
Or
get
just
to
learn how
exercise
to
self-control.
Yeah, like learn how to deal with this problem so that the temptation lessens over time,
Yeah.
because they act like that's not an option.
Right.
Oh,
Right?
what?
Like we also have found that we also did research with 3,000 men where we actually measured whether or not men experience lust and sexual temptation the way that these books like Every Man's Battle and Twitter threads like that beautiful gem that you read to us.
He's an image bearer. Yep.
Yeah, he is. We measured whether or not this is actually every man's battle, and most men don't actually have this kind of visceral reaction from what we have found. And we had men being very honest in that survey about stuff like they were very honest about other stuff, but this stuff, like the idea of like, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with that, or when I see this, I don't automatically picture them naked. No, I don't. Like, I just kind of move on with my day. That's an option.
Yeah.
And what I think has been happening is we have been trained, and a lot of us who were raised in evangelical circles are trained to see things with a sexual lens because we've been so trained to be hypervigilant of sexuality, right? We scan every single lyric and every single book and every single TV show and every single movie to make sure we don't see anything else or hear anything else, which I'm not against. But then it turns into, we also have to make sure that our 8-year-olds are covering up, and we have to make sure that the 12-year-olds aren't causing the 60-year-old elders to want to look up their skirts. And we have to make sure that she knows that he can't stop himself if she lets him go too far. So if she doesn't want to start, if she doesn't want to go there, then she just shouldn't even start, because he's not going to be able to stop. And so everyone has to be hyper vigilant all the time. Did you think about sex? Did you think about sex? Did you think about sex? Stop thinking about sex. Stop thinking about sex. Stop thinking about sex. And then what happens? Boobs! Oh no! Like, it's everywhere. And I think this is what happens, is we've created a hypervigilant society by telling them don't think about pink elephant. And when everything that we talk about when it comes to gender and just friendships is all about how we need to make sure we're fighting temptation, and we're not wearing things that are causing each other to stumble, and we're only doing side hugs, and all of this emphasis on making sure that the sex doesn't happen.
Right.
And we don't just leave there to be space to understand that maybe actually if we stop talking about sex all the time with 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds, maybe they'll stop thinking about it all the time. Like, yes, everyone's horny in high school. That's fine. But like the idea that we're telling everyone all the time that we have to be so focused on this. And everywhere you go, there are going to be women who are out there just trying to get you to look at their butts. Ooh, there's so many butts everywhere. You won't believe it. You go to the mall, you know how many butts are at the mall? So
See more butts? Yep. Simpsons.
See more butts. Also, there are boobs. There are so many boobs at the mall, and all these ladies, they just want you to look at their boobs. And there's nothing that you can do as a helpless man except for all these boobs all around you. You're just boob city.
You bounce your eyes. You
gotta bounce your eyes all the time. And we have just heard from so many men who didn't grow up in this culture, who weren't taught women's bodies are scary and dangerous, whose moms and sisters and grandmas wore bikinis around them. It's like, it's just a body.
Yeah. What do we call it? We call it the evangenital culture.
Evangelical.
Yeah.
Or didn't
That's
you call
exactly
it crotchianity at one point too?
I think
Crotchianity?
Sky
That's
Honey calls it
astounding.
crotch Christianity.
And I think that's a lot of what we're calling for with our research is to recognize that, first of all, every man's battle is not actually every man's battle.
Yeah.
And it definitely doesn't need to be a lifelong one. And we get to have freedom as brothers and sisters in Christ to just love each other and to just have community. And we should be able to expect safety, respect, and all that comes with that. And we should be able to understand that a Christian culture that considers the literal child in a lot of these cases, and if you read She Deserves Better, you'll hear about these cases, the literal children, to be able to keep the grown men at bay sexually. That's not Christianity as it's supposed to be. And I think we can do better. And that's why it's She Deserves Better, because we all deserve better than that, right?
Yes.
So let's go back a little bit and talk about purity culture as it was expressed back in the day. Sheila, I'm guessing you, like us, are in your early 30s, and so you're of a previous generation than Rebecca, but close. Did purity culture work? If the goal of purity culture was to make us virgins on our honeymoons or on our wedding nights, did purity culture work?
Yes, it did. You actually, and you can see that girls, millennials were more likely to be virgins on their wedding nights. People who use purity rings more likely to be virgins on their wedding night. It worked. The question is, though, is that the best outcome variable? And that's what we were asking, is because that's the only thing that mattered. Yeah. And I'll tell you, as the mom to two married daughters, the day of their weddings, I was not worried about their virginity. Instead, I was way more thanking God that they were marrying men that were safe. And I wanted them to have good marriages. And this is what we never bothered to ask. It's like, are there other things that matter? And so we were asking, okay, what about future marital and sexual satisfaction? What about self-esteem? Because self-esteem, that's going to impact mental health, relationships, your job outcomes. What about your chance of marrying an abuser? Or even what about your chance of getting married if you want to get married? And so when you combine all of those things, then purity culture didn't work that well. You had higher rates of marrying abusers for a lot of the things that happen in purity culture. Yeah. You had worse sex lives, worse marriages. It wasn't that great. And so we got to do better, and we got to ask, are there other things that matter more?
I like how
because it's not even an either or. I also want to say, like, it's not an either or. It's not like you can have a good marriage or you can be a virgin.
Right.
Like we can want our kids to make wise choices and make good choices, but it's how we talk about that stuff that matters, and it's the emphasis that we put on it that matters.
Yeah, because what we saw in our stats, which is so interesting, is when it comes to the belief that if you wait to get married, you'll have the best sex ever. The exact one you were talking about, Mike, right? Like, if you wait to get married, it'll blow your mind, right? So in adulthood, now from like predominantly married people, it's really interesting seeing who still believes it and who doesn't, and what their sexual satisfaction is. Because the people with awesome sexual satisfaction, a lot of them still believe it. And why? Let's talk about why, right? Because if you were a virgin and you got married and then you had awesome sex, of course you're going to still believe it. That's survivorship bias, right? I was one of the ones who was in the right group, and so therefore it must have been correct. But then there's this whole group who used to believe it in high school, who believed it so strong, and then they got married and they have low sexual satisfaction, and they strongly disagree now. And I think that's often the group that's missing from these discussions is, what about the ones for whom this ended up being a lie?
Yeah.
What about the ones who put their whole heart into this whole purity culture, who decided that they were going to wait because they believed that they were told that God had promised them. Words were told to them, and they believed it was from God, that God promised them amazing sex. And then they get married and they find out, oh, it's actually not that easy. It's not just a switch that flips. Yeah. We've now not only given them a worse sex life, we've also taken a part of their faith, and we've replaced it with betrayal. God has lied to them now, and we've talked to so many women who reel.
Well, that's why a lot of people who are deconstructing their faith are ones who have grown up in that. I mean, that's a big part of what shaped their faith and how they see God and how they experience the kindness of God and the faithfulness of God when this huge thing was promised to them. And it either didn't work and it didn't, the switch didn't get switched magically. And then also like all that stuff still continues after you get married, or the thought of it, of, you know, like, does the mall suddenly have less butts to be aware of after you get married? I mean, like, what's the, you know, how does that all work? You know?
Exactly. Does
That's
your
the title
wedding
of the
ring
episode,
become
Tim.
like this blinders? The wedding ring acts as a butt blinder. Yeah.
The butt
Although
blinders.
that is the lie,
this makes
that
me
is
so
the lie
happy.
that was fed to us also, is that, you know, you have to constantly be putting out so that your husband's not tempted by other women all the time when he
Oh.
goes to work.
Yeah. That's
Right, and
romance
those are
right there.
contradictory.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the most horrifying things I ever heard a guy say was, the Bible teaches it doesn't matter where you get your appetite as long as you eat at home.
Oh my
wow.
God.
And that was the masculine version of this, which is as romantic, you know. One of the things that, and I'm kind of bouncing off of something you guys were just talking about, one of the most powerful sentences in the book that I wrote down was, evangelical teachings about sex limit a woman's ability to stand up for herself. And Suzie, you're nodding too. I'd love for the three of you guys to talk about how that plays out, because we can talk in general about yoga pants and butts and those sorts of things, but the internalized misogyny that would cause a young woman not to stand up for herself, I can get more in touch with that idea as a guy with a daughter than I can the bouncing eyes and all of those sorts of things. I'd love for the three of you to talk just about how does that translate? So if your job, like you said, Suzie, is to put out so your husband is satisfied and doesn't go eat elsewhere, which is a horrible metaphor for that whole thing. How does that get internalized into feeling like you can't stand up for yourself? Is it because your desires are second to his? Is that how that gets internalized?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it for sure. I love, Sheila and Rebecca, how you talk about boundaries and emotional health also, because, you know, it's part of the diet that's given to us, is that we exist for other people, for the sake of other people, and not for the glory. I mean, our glorifying God is, you know, through serving other people. And that we're last, that we're to put ourselves last. So there's this, adoration for the woman who, you know, serves without boundaries, doesn't say no, is always available for other people, is always giving of herself. And it's just not, it doesn't leave much for the woman to be herself and to be who she is and to be possibly who God made her to be and to do what God has specifically called her to do and to be, because she's so busy fulfilling everybody else's demands. So I think that, you know, they go hand in hand. Like when you're told that as a wife, this is what you're supposed to do. You know, 6 weeks after you have a baby, this is what you need to go home and do after you get the all clear from your doctor's appointment.
And don't forget that even during that 6 weeks, you need to be doing other stuff for him.
Right.
Because faithfulness is a two-person job, says Kevin Lehman. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you guys...
You know, I think one of the worst parts is that we have made women feel responsible for the sins of men. And so when we are treated badly, there's no point in speaking up because you feel like you caused it in some way. You know, even, and not even just sexual sin, even as Shanti Felden said, you know, if he's mad at you, you disrespected him. If he's annoyed with you, you probably talk too much, because women talk too much. You know, if he's carried away with you, it's because of what you were wearing. If he pushes past your boundaries, I hate that phrase, by the way.
Pushing past boundaries.
Pushing past boundaries means pushing past someone's no. If you push past someone's no, that's called assault.
Yeah.
It's not pushing past someone's boundaries, it's sexual assault. But throughout books like Every Young Man's Battle and Every Young Woman's Battle, they talk about how boys can push past your boundaries and what were you expecting if you started to make out? And it's like, excuse me?
Well, and I have I don't have any daughters. I have 4 sons. And what really upsets me about that is that it's like you give the men and the boys permission. It's like, you know, inadvertently you're giving them permission that, well, whatever it is that they're experiencing, whatever it is that they're doing, it's because they can't help themselves. And so they almost get a soft pass with that, you know? And I don't like that. Mm-mm.
I'm going to call that a hard pass just for the double.
You know, we were on a podcast a while ago and we were explaining to the host that just because a boy has a high sex drive doesn't mean that he can't stop. Because when you say, well, he can't stop, what you're saying is he can't help but rape you.
Right.
But that's not what we were told. You know, Shanti Felden in For Young Women Only did a study, and I'm about to give you a number that isn't accurate, okay? Because
the number is accurate to what's in the book, but we don't agree with the numbers.
I think her question was poorly worded, her possible answers are poorly worded, and the way she grouped her answers was poorly done. But she said 82% of boys feel either little ability or little responsibility to stop in a make-out situation.
82?
And so 82%. And so the advice that she gives is if you want to stop, it's safest to not even start. Now, to be clear, 100% of boys have the ability to stop.
And the responsibility to stop.
And
if she says no.
100% have the responsibility to stop. So that is straight up rape culture.
Yeah.
And yet that is what was taught heavily. And, you know, in our consent chapter, we have a lot of stories of girls who didn't realize they had been date raped because they thought, well, what did I expect? I started making out with him. And then
the word consent was never taught in any of the circles that I was in at that age.
No.
Never.
Well, absolutely not, because to talk about consent implies that there is a way to have sex properly outside of marriage. Right?
What?
So you can't talk about sex. You can't talk about consent because if someone's having sex, it's automatically a sin.
Yeah.
Which, like, that's fine. Regardless of what you believe, you still need to talk about consent because kids are raped. Like, but what happened instead was we were just taught.
And even before actual intercourse, I mean, there's lots of, like, I mean, a person should consent to holding your hand, you know? I mean, any kind of interaction like that, any kind of, like we ask, are you okay with a hug? Like we ask people for consent to hug. That was never language used when we were growing up.
No. And I think what I find so difficult about that is in our focus group studies that we did, we talked to women who had experienced rape in high school who did not realize it for nearly a decade because they had not had the proper language. There's one girl whose story we tell in the book, we call Vera, who had a boyfriend and she was struggling with concussion syndrome. And so he would bring her home during school hours if she was really struggling, because anyone who's had a concussion knows what that's like. And at one point she was blacked out and she wakes up and things are happening. And he's having sex with her. And she was in this evangelical youth group, was feeling like, okay, I had sex, but something about this feels wrong. But she didn't have the words for it. So she goes and she asks her, the student mentor on campus in like this Christian group on her high school, and says, so this happened. And she alluded to the force that he had used and how she didn't really agree to it. And he said, well, it takes 2 to tango.
Good Lord.
And then she said, well, I wasn't tangoing. It doesn't take 2 to tango. I wasn't tangoing. She goes to her youth pastor and his wife, still looking for help. And she explains what goes on. And the youth pastor's wife leaves the room, gets a blue piece of paper and a pink piece of paper, glues them together, waits for it to dry, rips them apart, and says, pieces of you will always be on him forever, and pieces of him will always be on you forever because you've had sex. Again, no one mentions consent. The youth pastor just says, what were you expect? You're dating a non-Christian. So in essence, stupid girl.
Right.
This is just, you deserved to be raped because you dated a non-Christian. And this is why we need to talk about consent. Because,
I'm not sure it's different. Like, we tend to blame this stuff on purity culture, but I am not sure it's different. And that's why part of the thing that we really want from She Deserves Better is we're hoping that youth pastors read this. We're hoping that parents read this just to know, okay, these are the messages that have been given historically in churches and are still being given. And we need to teach our girls to recognize them as toxic so that they know what's healthy and so they can reject the toxic stuff. And hey, you know what? If you see toxic stuff in your church, maybe it's not a safe place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because what we've been seeing, which is similar to what Mike was saying earlier, is a lot of these purity culture messages, you don't see the explicit purity culture messages in the same way anymore. Again, very few churches are doing the chewed up gum. And if your church is doing the chewed up gum still,
Run.
raise the alarm, okay? So very few churches are actually doing that. And for example, one of the big ones is people who used to really speak on specific modesty rules, like, it can't go to more than this many inches here and that many inches there, are now saying, we don't really use modesty rules anymore. We talk about dignity and dressing with the gospel in mind. It's like, what the heck does that mean, though? Like, so a girl walks in, you don't like what she's wearing. It's like, oh my goodness, Tracy, does that say gospel to you? Are you clothed in the blood of Christ today? Does that say the
Suzie,
resurrection?
Suzie, does that say gospel? I mean, you're wearing black, Suzie.
Is that
Would
gospel?
Jesus wear black?
It's true.
Like it, and I think what we're trying to do, what I think has happened, looking and doing a review of what was said in the past and what's said now and how it's different, is we've gotten rid of the fixings, but we haven't addressed the foundation. So we've gotten rid of the specific Christianese phrases and we've
Totally.
swapped them out. But the foundation is wrong, and we need to take Jesus' words seriously, where we do not pour new wine into old wineskins. We need new wineskins. And what we're trying to say in this book and our research is getting people to understand what was the foundation of this teaching. The foundation of the teaching that says that, you shouldn't, like, that says, well, if you were just making out with him, you should have known better. The foundation of that is that men and boys are not able to control themselves sexually, and so girls deserve what happens to them.
Mm-hmm.
We need to get rid of that foundation. We need to replace that with a better foundation, which is that both men and women are created in the image of God. Both men and women have the Holy Spirit, and Jesus did not die for boys or girls more than one for the other.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus died for both of us. Both of us have the Holy Spirit, and both of us can be expected to treat one another with honor, dignity, and respect. That's the foundation.
Mm-hmm. How do we, because I know I can hear, and I've heard you address on other podcasts, the natural question to all of this. Yeah, but we don't want them to go to the opposite extreme either. Mm-hmm. And what I hear you guys offering is a way off of the continuum. So the continuum says it's either purity culture or it's just rampant immorality. And because the focus of the whole continuum is on their sexual behavior.
Even genitals.
Yes.
You're saying there's a different continuum that we should be talking about, and that's the Imago Dei. Mm-hmm. And so would you articulate a bit, and you began to reference it, Rebecca, the foundation then, and you give, I mean, just to give kudos to you guys on the book. I mean, you give all sorts of great conversation starters for parents, particularly mothers and daughters. But I'm actually going to go through this with my daughter. There's some parts in here that are just brilliant that I want to articulate to her. But point is, how do we begin the foundation, or what other elements do we include in the foundation that allow us to have some of the conversations about wisdom, about not putting yourself in a situation that you could be drugged, or, those sorts of things. How do we have that conversation without playing on the same old continuum that has been the conversation for 40 years?
Absolutely.
I
mean, I can say that
go
there's a ground rule here, which is that your daughter never hears that you can force someone to assault you. Like, I think a lot of these messages get really confusing when someone's already been exposed to the idea that your assault might be your fault.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so I think
that's so
the ground floor here, the foundation really does come down to everyone is responsible for their choices and their choices alone. So if someone assaulted you, and you can think in 2020 vision, back, like hindsight's 2020, right? And you can think, but if I had done this, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, there's only one decision that changes whether or not an assault happened, is that someone decided to assault.
Yeah.
That's the only decision. Doesn't matter any other decisions you make. They can choose to, or they can choose not to.
Yeah.
And I think that's the foundation that we start with both boys and girls. But what we were trying to talk about in the book was, when we're talking to our kids about, first let's talk about like sexual choices, is that we focus so much on virginity and we've forgotten about the Christian concept of chastity. right? So virginity is a one and done. It's you lose your virginity and now you no longer have it. Now you are sexual. Now you are a person who has sex. It's an identity formation, right? It's I am a virgin or I am a non-virgin. I am either someone who does not have sex or someone who does have sex. Whereas the idea of chastity sees our behaviors in sexuality as more of a journey and a way of being. And the same way that I can say I'm an honest person, right? Like I practice honesty. That doesn't mean that you never say a lie that you have to then repent of and fix.
It's a posture.
Same thing if you're a chaste person and then you do something that you're like, ooh, that was actually against my values and I really should we should go back a couple of steps. You can do that and it hasn't changed your identity.
Yeah.
Oh.
Because
Hold on. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. But I want to bookmark that, Rebecca. That is a massive, for me. I mean, I just need to say it back so that I get it, because virgin, non-virgin is an identity statement. We've made sexuality, behaviors, identity statements. And that is, wow. I've just not considered
Well, then we had that language
so
too
true.
of being, so in following that line, we had that language in junior high or high school, or whatever, becoming a born again virgin. And so, you know what I mean?
Oh!
Secondary virgin. I'm a secondary virgin.
I'm a virgin with an asterisk.
Exactly. Right.
I heard that a lot. Virgin with an asterisk.
Yeah, totally.
So
and
Sheila,
then also
I'm
it
sorry,
didn't matter if you were.
it.
It also in those, and you know, it doesn't matter if you're doing everything else as long as you're not doing the one thing.
Right.
Well, we always joke that was the number one question. You know, I was a youth pastor for a while, and anyone that's worked in youth ministry, especially with the boys, was always like, "How far's too far? How far's too far? Like, where's the line? How do you describe this? How do I define it? Where does that virginity tag? Where does that begin and end? And how much room do I have to play before I hit that mark?"
I'm sorry I interrupted you, Sheila.
No.
I wanted to jump on that just to get it in my brain, because I think that is probably, well, I don't know. I was going to say it probably is the most dangerous hangover.
I think it is one of them. I absolutely think it's one of them, because the emphasis on virginity is also why we didn't talk about consent, and also why we made rape something that was also your fault, because it changed your identity.
Yeah.
Wow.
But here's what we heard too in a lot of our focus groups is, let's say that you grow up feeling like your whole point, the way that you show that you're a Christian, the thing that means that you believe in Jesus is that you are a virgin. And then something happens. Maybe you're raped, or maybe you just go further than you wanted to, consensual, non-consensual, whatever, you're no longer a virgin. And so many girls told us, I felt like I had no right to say no now. Because their whole reason for saying no was to protect their virginity. But we told them to protect their virginity. We never told them how to protect themselves.
Oh, my Lord. Suzie, you were nodding. Does that?
Yeah, in agreement. Totally. Because it's like, I already did it, so I might as well just keep doing it. Who cares?
Yeah. But even if they didn't want to, want to do it, they felt like, I can't think of a good reason not to, because the reason not to have sex is so that I can be a virgin. Well, now I'm not a virgin. And so my boyfriend's pressuring me. Other people are pressuring me. And I don't have a clear reason to say no, because it was never about chastity. Yeah. It was only ever about virginity.
And the other problem is, of course, with our research that we did for Great Sex Rescue, we found that sex in marriage, in Christian marriages that believe a lot of these really toxic things, it is not good. It is not God honoring. There are a lot of Christian women out there who are having sex under duress, out of fear that if they don't have sex, they're going to lose everything, out of fear that their husbands are going to harm them or their children, out of anger if he doesn't get release. And they have been taught by their churches that that's just how men are, is men get cranky and grumpy and mean. And so if you want him to be nice, just have sex with him. That's fine. All he needs is sex. Right? We hear this all the time in these places. And so when we focus less on, are you doing the right or wrong things, and more in, are you acting in a way so that your sexuality is a way that you can honor Christ more than it is a way that you can achieve bliss, right? More like when what chastity is really about is submitting your your sexual desires and behaviors to be another way that we can show Christ's love and the dignity, respect, and honor. That's always what I say. It's honor, dignity, and respect for the imago Dei and the person in front of you. So when you are 14 years old and you're dating Brent from geometry,
Brent.
like probably to be chastity is probably going to not include doing stuff in the back of your uncle's pickup truck. Okay. Like that's, you can probably figure out, okay, we're not going to go there because we're both children.
Right.
First of all, we are both legally not able to consent. Like we are both children right now. This is someone who, you know, we both deserve to have time to grow up and figure out who we are before we start that part of our life.
Yeah.
You know, talking about how I'm right now just kind of going, I don't want to just give into my urges and use someone to do something that would feel really good and be really fun, but I don't know if I can promise forever to this person. I don't know if I'm going to be breaking their heart. And then, you know, when you're married, you know, chastity also does mean that you don't take your sexual urges out on your spouse. That sex is something that is still supposed to be honoring to both people. Chastity in marriage means that you don't get to threaten your spouse with, well, if you don't have sex with me, then I guess I'll just watch porn then.
Right.
Like you don't get to say, well, how do you expect me to want to play with the kids and be nice to you when you haven't put out in a week? Like you don't get to say those things because that's not chaste. That's being lustful. That's not being chaste. And that's why I wanted to talk about this thing, because there's this idea that we hear from people is stay pure until you're married. Stay pure until you're married. Then you can be as impure as you want. Right. And that's not actually what it is.
Yeah.
You know, we shouldn't be it's not this thing where you have to be a good person sexually until you're married and then you can be as depraved or mean or whatever as you want. Because that's what a lot of people end up doing. Yeah. And we need to stop pretending that doesn't happen. And instead, we can teach people that, yeah, you're going to live a chaste life. That's the goal. And yes, we're going to make mistakes sometimes, but you also might not. Like that's also an option. But if you do make mistakes, you still have something to offer. For pity's sake, you don't have anything less to offer. You're still you. And you know what? Your virginity is going to be gone the first time you have sex anyway. Yeah. So like you're still you. And I think that's what we heard from a lot of people in our focus groups too, is just realizing when they got married, when they were virgins, and then they had sex for the first time and they're like, I don't even have as much to offer my husband anymore. Yeah. Because there's this emphasis on that first time. Yeah. And so now it's just sex with the same woman. Because we've so focused on that losing of that virginity. We made it such a big deal that we reduce women to kind of like one-time use items. Yeah. And I just think that can stop. I think we're all done with it. I think we're all happy to move past it. Can we all please just move to something healthier? Like that's our call, is none of us are benefiting from this. Why don't we just all, again, get rid of the old wineskins, grab some new ones, pour in some fresh wine, and let's go.
One of the things you recommend and argue is that sex education is protective. Because there's, and we certainly see this in legislation now, in state legislatures. I mean, there's this, it's now a culture war issue about how much sex ed do kids get and when. And what did your research show, if you'd want to speak to that?
You know, I wrote a column in the local paper for 12, 15 years. And I remember back in 2003, 2004, I probably was writing articles against sex ed and thinking how terrible this is. And I now regret that. And I take that all back. And so this is my apology tour. But, you know, we gave women a list of 10 sex ed words. And we said, how many of these words did you know? Could you define at the point that you graduated high school? And then we asked them, what age were you when you knew that the female orgasm existed? You know, how much did you understand consent? Did you understand date rape when you graduated high school? And when you look at all of those things together, the more information you have, the younger you have it, the better you do. There are no downsides to more information. They're less likely to have multiple sex partners. Their self-esteem is way higher. They're way less likely to marry abusers. They're less likely to be abused in church. There is no downside to information. But if you look at the generations, boy, can you see the difference among millennials. I'm Gen X. We had way better sex ed than millennials did.
Oh,
And
really?
that's terrible. Oh yeah, like it's like people knew stuff. Even boomers did. People knew
That's
stuff.
because
and
our
all of a sudden
parents weren't
millennials
paying
knew
attention
nothing.
to us.
Yeah, the latchkey kids.
Yeah, I think so.
All the
They
latchkey
didn't know where
kids
we
of
were.
the 80s.
I think so. But and it shows they didn't understand consent. They didn't understand all these words. And women at high school graduation are more likely to know the words for male anatomy than they are for female
Totally.
anatomy.
Yeah. So let me, if I may, Susie and Tim, if you guys have another question, let me fire this one out, and then we'll work towards wrapping it up. So, and I'd love for you to talk to men. We have loads of men who are in vocational ministry in one sense or another, and if you were like us and horrified at some of these things, how do we go about as men creating safety? And Susie, so I'm sitting I'm helping to lead a church. I speak a lot of the weeks. I obviously have a daughter and married to a woman. How do I, in that circumstance, help create the safety that we're talking about here?
Make spaces for women to speak and where women's voices matter. Because that's one of the starkest things we saw is this idea that girls talk too much. A majority of teenage girls believe this. We even get a majority of adult women believing it, that girls talk too much. And when we say that, what we're really saying is that women's voices are a problem. Your opinions, they get in the way of men's opinions. And that might, okay, but what if it's actually true though? Like, what if girls do talk too much? And this is the impression that girls just chat, and boys say nothing. But actual studies do not show that. James Dobson in 1983, I think he made the claim that women say 25,000 words a day and men only say 12,000. And then Gary Smalley said it was like 50,000 and 25,000, or I might be getting the numbers mixed up.
But honestly, they all made up the numbers, so I don't even care.
No citations.
I know a lot
no
of them
citations ever. Yeah, no citations. They made these claims, and they made them so that they could tell women, ladies, by the time he gets home from work, he's used all of his words for the day. And I know you've hardly said any, but you need to leave him alone. Just let him go relax because he doesn't want to hear you. And so this was this idea, he doesn't want to hear you. You are a problem.
You're an inconvenience.
When actual scientists have measured this, women and men say the same number of words a day. There is no real statistical difference.
Yes, but we are revered for our gentle and quiet spirit, guys.
Right. And how much are we told that? In Love and Respect by Emerson Eggerichs, over and over again, he says, win him without words. Win him without words. Don't use your words. And this is what women are told. Don't use your words. And girls need to know their words matter.
Yeah, come on.
Because if she can't tell you, if your daughter can't tell you what she's thinking, how is she ever going to speak up to the controlling boyfriend? What is she ever going to say when she's in the toxic workplace?
100%.
Come on, Sheila. Come on.
Like, seriously, if your daughter cannot disagree with you, is she ever going to disagree with people who are hurting her?
Oh.
So we need to give our daughters permission to disagree and to speak up. It doesn't mean you have to go along with what she says, but encourage her thoughts, encourage her opinions. And don't ever make her feel like her voice is a problem.
Oh, well said, guys. Dang. Susie, Tim, any last thoughts?
I wish
so
we could,
many.
Yeah, there's so many. The figuring out how to be counter-program, because obviously this is an issue in the church, and I grew up in the church, so I was fed everything that you guys said, almost verbatim. And it was only like 10 or 15 years ago where I realized that I have my own agency and responsibility in the conversation and it was like, and this sounds so stupid, but it was like a bomb went off and I was like, oh, it's not her fault. It's not her fault. It's not, I can change all these things and they have nothing to do with her agency or anything. So it was like, it was a dumb revelation that was like, oh, okay. But you know, as you guys were talking, I'm thinking about like the Brock Turner situation and things like that have that are still so prevalent in culture at large, not just the Christian culture, but the culture at large, and figuring out, like with the question that Mike just asked, how do we as believers become a counter narrative to all that, rather than coming up with our own versions of subjugation that we build and anoint and baptize as, whatever. How we become
It's
that
biblical masculinity.
Totally, like all that stuff. We're fed all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I think that what we've seen that's made us sad. But we're seeing. I mean, talking to people like you guys and the podcast who've had us on, it's encouraging. But what we have heard from so many women in churches is that the problem is that the men aren't speaking up. So there'll be healthy men in the churches, but they don't actually speak up. Yeah. They go to the Every Man's Battle Bible study and they're like, yeah, it's like, I don't really agree with it, but whatever. And it's like, no. Like, because the problem is, if you're in a situation where the men are honestly believing that women are threats and temptations that are just trying to undermine your purity, and they have this belief that women should be quiet and women should.
If they're Eric, get rid of the pools.
Yes, if they have that kind of mentality,
swimming,
frankly,
done.
I'm going to be honest, they don't listen to women.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can be here, we can do all the research, we can write as good of a book as we possibly can, and those men in that mentality are not going to listen because they have drank the misogynistic Kool-Aid.
Totally.
And so having other men just say, oh, no, that's not normal. If you're finding a 10-year-old is dressing immodestly and causing you to stumble, that's not normal. That's called pedophilia. That is not just simply biblical masculinity. Like calling people out and being like, oh, that 15-year-old's not covered up enough. She's 15, dude.
Right.
She's 15.
Yeah, that's not her yet.
Like, do we need to call the FBI? She's 15.
Yeah.
Like, instead of, and what we often see is that the men unconsciously take the side of the predatory man.
Yep.
Right? Because they think, yeah, but like guys just are visual. So she could help him out though. She could wear a longer skirt. No, she's 15. Yeah. Right. And I think that's one of the things that is a real action step, that especially if there are people who are in ministry, who are totally on board with like, we need to make this a safe place. Like, we actually need to be somewhere where the culture sees us as different and not just as people who would defend the Brock Turners of the world and call it biblical masculinity. We need to be different. We need to actually show how we can be the hands and feet of Christ and how we can look at women and men with the eyes of Christ. I think one of the first things you got to do is you got to start calling it out when other men are doing it around us. Like, because we can only do it with the men who have ears to hear because we're women.
Right.
Yeah,
and that's, I think, where men can really take charge there.
One thing that's really encouraged us is how many men are reading both The Great Sex Rescue and She Deserves Better. We never thought that they would. I mean, in publishing, you're told women will read books by women and men, but men will only read books by men. So it's been amazing to see how many men have actually engaged with our stuff. That's really encouraging.
Oh, yeah.
But I think for many men, too, what they don't realize is they don't know what their wives were told.
Totally.
Yeah.
They don't know what their daughters are being told, because we really do inhabit two different worlds in the church. And I think just reading these books and understanding the messages that were given to your wife, understanding the messages that might be given to your daughter, and making sure that you can head that off at the pass to make sure that doesn't happen.
Totally.
Yeah.
Because you may not know. You may not know how bad this stuff is.
Yeah, I didn't hear the used bubblegum thing for recent. I mean, within the last 5-10 years, I had never heard that before. When I heard, I was like, they said what?
A rose without her petals.
They handed out bubblegum. We all had to chew it up. They handed out bubblegums, like, spit it out. That's you if you have sex.
For real?
Like, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or it was the tape on the wedding dress. Like, the more you tape it and on and off, it doesn't stick anymore. There was that one too.
You did yours on a wedding dress? That's a whole other layer.
They had like a whole wedding dress thing, and that's what they did.
Well,
the one I saw was naming all of your exes and then inviting them into your bedroom.
Yeah.
Well, that's how I Kissed Dating Goodbye opens, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they're the wedding party.
Man, there's so many things that we didn't even get to, like, because working in education, there's so many conversations around dress code and how that manifests itself. And I teach at a college, but my wife teaches at a high school, and she was at the last high school she was able to, because it was a brand new high school, she was able to be a part of the conversation about what dress code looks like. But the way in which we compartmentalize dress code gender-wise, but also racially, is just wild. and
Yep.
it speaks so much. It's just I don't know. You guys are talking about this. Like, I have a 7-year-old daughter, and she's got the loudest. She's just got so much spirit, and she's such like she's a strong kid, and so there's that whole thing of like, I want her to have that as an adult woman. I definitely don't want to be the one that tamps it out. It might kill me now, but like I want her to have that gift going. It's a gift. I want her to have that. I want it to be celebrated and not, but you can already see outliers being like, she's a little bit much. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
I've always been a little bit much. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Suzie, any last words?
Yeah, I think, it's really interesting. I was a women's pastor for a lot of years. And Sheila, one of the things I really appreciate about the work that you do is your Instagram, the "Here I Fixed It For You" stuff that you do. Because I've gone back, and I mean, a lot of the books that you fix for us are books that I had in my library. And like you, I mean, I may have skimmed some of them, but a lot of them I didn't fully read all the way. But I go back to those books, and knowing that we gave those books to people, and I read the things, like I've gone back a couple times and thought to myself, did it really actually say that? Like, does Kevin Lehman actually call his penis Mr. Happy? And like, I've gone back,
Mr. Happy likes to be kissed.
oh
yes,
my
I
God.
mean, it's in there, and like, that's the book that we gave to people. And so I love what you said, and fully 1000% agree with you about all the stuff you said about men creating safe places for women. But I also think that women can be so complicit with the whole situation. Like,
Absolutely.
a lot of the harmful messages that I received were from women. They came out of the mouths of women. And I know that they were, it's the the implanted misogyny and all that, but it's that was originally taught by men. But a lot of the harmful messages I got from women, and me as a women's pastor, I mean, I'm with you on the whole apology tour. I've had to go back and ask for forgiveness from women who I said things and gave advice to so poorly that I would never do the same way because of what I absorbed and what I was part of and what I believed was the right way to do things. So I think that, that's a big part of it for women, is becoming, I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways I'm deconstructing that part of my life so that I can speak about it and teach my kids and talk to women in a much healthier way. So I also think it's interesting, we've had a lot of accusations come out that have been like years after the fact, a lot of things that have come out like, oh, my youth pastor did this to me and it was like 20 years ago and it's under investigation and all that SBC stuff. And it's so interesting to me in light of what you said about us not having language for that and the women that you interviewed that didn't understand that they were raped until 10 years later. So it is interesting how many later things are coming out now that people are realizing more clearly what their experience actually was.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good.
Absolutely.
Ladies, thank you for joining us today. So appreciate it. I know this is like the standard close question, but where would you encourage people to find you online?
Yeah, so baremarriage.com.
Yes!
B-A-R-E, baremarriage.com. You will find, if you click on books, you'll find Great Sex Rescue and She Deserves Better and all kinds of other fun stuff. There's links to our weekly podcast, which is Bare Marriage, and there's links to my socials, including Instagram with my Fixed It For Yous. Twitter is Angry Sheila. That's always fun. And yeah, all the other links to fun stuff like that.
Nice. And Rebecca, you're on there too?
Yep, you'll find me wherever you find her.
Yep.
I like that. Well done, ladies.
Keep it simple.
Perfect. Thank you both so very much
Thank
for
you
being
so
with us
much
today.
Thank you.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. I just really want to be very clear and thank you for the work that you're doing. It's so important.